A very good morning to you. Fancy meeting you here again. We must do this more often. Welcome to day 4 of Jersey Tech Week. My name's Gary Burgess. It's my privilege and pleasure to be guiding you through 2 sessions a day live or to catch up whenever you wish, exploring so many facets of Jersey's growing digital industry. And because we're mixing virtual and reality this year, actually we can cast our nets even wider, and we've got contributors from right around the world. I must say thank you to PwC for supporting this morning's session, which is focused on digital is the economy. Let's take a look now at what's in store over the next couple of hours for you. I think you will like this. We start with a fascinating panel session being led by Digital Jersey's Tony Moretta, speaking to representatives of brands you will know well, looking at the importance of digital for our economy and how that may change over time. We're then going to be looking at what are the skills that this island and this island's workforce needs now and in the future. A big study of work has been done on that, and then we'll be exploring the issue of digital skills with another panel session later on this morning. I should also say tomorrow we are going to be launching the Jersey Tech Awards. We'll be doing that in our afternoon session at 3 o'clock tomorrow. So if you've not yet signed up for that, may I recommend you head to digital.je/TechWeek and get yourself registered, because the launch of what effectively are the Oscars of Jersey's digital industries are something I really don't want you to miss. But we are in the here and now. Tony Moretta from Digital Jersey is here. Tony, good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
Day 4, I think that's still a smile on your face. Yeah. We're learning so much during the course of this week. A recurring theme for me is that as much as we focus on technology, it's fundamentally about people. And as we focus on people, it's fundamentally about the economy.
Yeah, it really is. And when Digital Jersey was set up, a couple of years before I got here, I think things were focused on building just a new digital sector of the economy, diversification, all things like that. I think we, like a lot of organizations, we pivoted, requirements change, the market changes. And I think people realize more now than ever that digital is not just about the sort of Facebooks and the Googles and Apples. Digital is everything. And the fact that, you need a digital strategy no matter what your business. And we're already seeing in Jersey, it's not just finance using some amazing fintech solutions, it's even agriculture. One of Jersey's great historic industries is using technology all the time, whether it's soil sensors, whether it's automation for picking and planting those Jersey Royals. And I think people have really realized now that digital is everything. It's not just something in the corner that the geeks do on their kit. It's something everybody does in their everyday lives.
I think that's such an important point. We hear a lot, and I'll include the government of Jersey in this, but governments worldwide talking about their wish to break down their silo mentalities. Indeed, the way people have looked at digital in the past as an industry, it sits in its own box, not necessarily in the corner, but it sits in its own box. I think this year, in a strange way, has helped a lot of people realize, whether it's doing your groceries, whether it's catching up with grandma and granddad, technology and digital is actually the glue that is holding all of this together.
You're absolutely right. And wasn't it great in Jersey this year for lockdown? One of the few silver linings, there weren't many, is that people were able to go home. They were able to work. They were able to keep in touch with loved ones. They were able to watch their Netflix box sets, etc. And they didn't have to worry that it wouldn't work. We're one of the few places, possibly the only place in the world, that has full fiber to every house, to every office. And we could just do it. And I think something that people maybe took for granted, didn't quite appreciate, they really did this year.
I love that you've mentioned our world-class connectivity, because I know it means you have been able to connect to some world-class people. Tony, I'm going to hand over to you right now. The floor is yours. I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks very much, Gary. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our panel. As I said, we've been able to get some people that hopefully in an ideal world would have actually travelled over to see us in Jersey. But guys, you're not missing much today looking outside the window at the weather. So hopefully you guys can hear me. So I'll introduce the panel. And firstly, we have Stephen Blackman. I'm not sure that he's got all of this on his business card, if it fits, but he's Principal Economist and Strategic Research Director, is that still right, at Natwest Group. I'm glad to see the Natwest name has returned, as it was my first employer after university. We've got Radhika Chadwick, a partner in McKinsey's public sector practice, looking at particular digital transformation. And last, but for anyone who knows us, certainly not least, we've got Nancy Cruickshank, who is Chief Digital Officer at Carlsberg Group. And the format we're going to follow today is that we're going to ask the panel each to speak for around 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion. If any of you watching have any questions, please put them on the Q&A channel, and we'll see if we have time to get to those at the end. But first, a bit of background to having Stephen here. As I reminded Stephen a couple of days ago, he has actually been to Jersey before. I'm assuming a number of times, but certainly I had the pleasure of seeing him about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even, when he came over to Jersey and he spoke to Jersey's Chamber of Commerce. For those of you off island, we have an amazing Chamber of Commerce that is actually the oldest in the world. That shows you for how long Jersey has been in business. And Stephen gave a presentation, and he talked about what a lot of people talk about these days, is how do we address the productivity challenge in countries, in industries. And he put an interesting slide up showing some of the productivity declines, or where they've flattened out around the world. And I actually asked him at the time, I said, how do you arrest that decline? Hopefully I'm not giving away too many of your slides here. I'm sure you got some new material now after all this time, Stephen. How do you arrest that decline? And what really struck me, and I literally have used this probably every couple of weeks ever since in Jersey, is he answered by saying, you need to invest in 2 things. You need to invest in technology, and you need to invest in education. And hopefully we're on our way to doing that, a long way still to go. But I'd love to hear from Stephen what his latest thoughts are on digital transformation, digital resilience, and where the world of technology is going. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really a delight to be here with you all today. It's great to hear you say stuff like glue and connectivity. I mean, I use words like interwoven, you know, in the way that technology, in a sense, does weave into all aspects of our lives, actually into the wider kind of tapestry that make up the commercial and social aspects of what we do. And it's so apt at the moment. When you think about, particularly in the UK and other advanced economies, less so for Jersey, with lockdowns, with much more kind of focus on your local area, even 2 years ago, would our ability to communicate like we're doing now have been possible? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, if there's one thing that's been put to the fire test of the last kind of six months or so, and it's been technology, and technology has come out trumps, actually. Other things less so, but technology kind of absolute trumps. And, you know, and in a way, technology is what is quite a spatial way of thinking, actually. If you think about Google Maps, if you think about all this kind of stuff, it's a very spatial way of thinking. And actually, coronavirus is a very spatial phenomenon. Whether, in fact, we can't shake hands anymore, right through to the need to partition, right through to the need to work from home, right through to the disruption to the travel networks, all of it is happening in a very spatial way. And given that Jersey's limitation has always been space, and largely about how London and the Southeast and the greater UK actually limitation has also been about space, has this been an opportunity, if done right, to actually, you know, to solve some of the deeper, more intractable kind of productivity problems via technology? Now, I've already wasted 2 minutes of my precious 10 minutes kind of like talking about that. So I want to start with a story and a question, right? And the story, if I can just kind of do that, and the story is this. Like many businesses, we've tried to keep a physical presence open, you know, mainly because a lot of our more vulnerable customers tend to use branches. When we've asked most of our frontline staff what they've been doing, they said, well, we've been mainly helping people move online to online banking for the first time. And the more astute, or at least what they think they are, kind of have said, oh, and by the way, I know I'm doing myself out of a job. Now, I don't believe the second one, but the first one is a really interesting phenomenon, because let's unpick, peel back actually what's taking place here. So we had an individual who used to go into a branch on a high street, the centre of the community. We tend to bundle up the activities that we do. We throw in a coffee or a tea. We do some other kind of shopping, that type of stuff. This person, went in to do a transaction, but actually the encounter that took place was a learning experience. Okay, it was between two people learning, one a mentor, one learning, one person not really understanding the skills that they actually have, because when we're teaching someone, we need to pick up loads of subtle clues. Is somebody just nodding because they're nodding, or do they really understand? So this person then learned something. It wasn't a transactional encounter. We needed to learn about what was actually taking place from a commercial perspective there. It was about building relationships, supporting, nurturing, reaching goals, that type of stuff. Anyway, this person who had learnt this goal maybe went home in the future, maybe would now use online for more communicative activities, as you said, speaking to their grandchildren, their children, or whatever that happens to be, doing other type of transactional activities online, going for advice online. That means in the future, fewer journeys into town, fewer kind of bundled up activities that I've talked about. The important thing, and the reason I'm speaking fast, is that a lot to get through, is that COVID doesn't change any of this, right? It doesn't change any of this. But what it has done is it's brought the future to us much, much sooner than we had either cognitively, commercially, economically, socially, psychologically, whatever you want to do, prepared for. And it's that the dislocation that we're feeling is us rapidly trying to make up for that lost time, cognitively and kind of commercially and kind of technologically as well. And even where we think there hasn't been a disruption, even where we think that it hasn't been an acceleration of trends, so we could say, let's say the liquid economy or the gig economy or the liquid workforce, actually we're already as a society thinking about how we could formalize aspects of that labour market beforehand. And crucially, even when we think there's disruption in terms of what's happening to major cities at the moment, pre-pandemic we were already concerned about what was happening with cities, particularly for the people that make them function, the people that serve the coffee and clean the offices, having to make ever longer journeys. And something that Jersey shares with the UK here is a waste of the assets that we have, the land that we have, right? So within the UK, we were making ever longer commutes, paying ever more for house prices, for ever smaller houses, to not really use them at all. To go to offices that would only be used for 12 hours a day on uber-prime property. This was, you could argue, and I'm not kind of going back to a la-la land where we could all have a loom in every room in a cottage industry, but it was a waste of assets in a way. And this is yet another example of, done well, via technology, we can actually use the assets that we have better for all of us, kind of for the future. But we're doing this change in a really artificial, in a really artificial environment. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to move my slides on, but they don't seem to be working. So if anyone could move them on, there we go. So what's quite interesting is we're doing it in a very artificial environment, which is that, it's a hothouse. Because what are some of us, if I was in the UK, I could say all of us, but what are some of us doing at this moment, right at this moment? We're watching telly, man. We're watching telly, right? We're communicating, but we're kind of watching telly. So it's a kind of real environment. And we know that communication is 85% visual, but we don't know what part of that is actually being physically present with someone else, I mean, there's people I've met like today, and people that I've met for 6 months or more, I've never seen below here, and, how much of this is how much of that is necessary to really understand, to kind of connect with people, and all this type of stuff. So we're doing this rapid adjustment. And you can see why what's happening is we're seeing that 75% of people are worried about COVID, and that is the health, but I think it's broader than that. We see that 36% are quite anxious. Only 2 in 10 of us, or 1 in 5 of us, are actually meeting up. You know, over 40% of us think it's going to last for at least another year. Almost 70% of us are having to learn new ways of working via technology. Yeah. And actually up to 30% of larger firms where lots of people work, you know, are seriously considering having permanent working from home. So what am I saying here? It's been a time machine. It's brought the future to us earlier. We need to adapt both commercially, technologically, but also cognitively, because it is an artificial environment. There is a kind of argument about, well, we'll get onto this. How much do you need the physical presence to kind of boost the innovation? Or actually, is this artificial hothousing that we're doing at the moment also a spur to make it more real, to solve that, whatever that gap in that 85% of communication that's visual, that's missing because we only see people from here and upwards? Lots of bright minds are trying to solve this at the moment to make it work better for everyone. But we need to be mindful when we're thinking about our employees and our customers that everyone feeling slightly different and we're all in very artificial kind of environment. Because if we go on to the next slide, I might try myself. If that doesn't work, somebody else might be able to do it. You know, we are at a very critical juncture in most of the developed world in terms of a second wave. And I don't want to labour the economic point here, but just because I think it's relatively clear to everyone. But the point about this slide that I think is most important is, you know, if we do see a decline of around 15%, or even if you think about actually, that doesn't get discussed about. We get kind of talks about V-shapes and stuff. But beneath that is something much, much more important, is that we had the economy as it was. We had an accelerant, a real accelerant. We have the economy almost as it is now, the future now. What we don't know is how much of the now economy that was the future, that is now, is the same in terms of the transactions, the flow of money, you know, that makes up. Is it going to be larger, smaller, the same size as the economy before? You know, and is that gap? Because we need policies that, as much as they do to try to protect the old world that we've seen, but actually try and embrace the new in terms of the way that we work now, the way that people are focused, what they're spending their money on, what's important for them, the way that businesses operate, the way that people want to work for businesses, and all that type of stuff. We need the kind of policies, both commercial and public policy, that reflects the world as it is, i.e. the future, rather than kind of looking back. And the second one is, through all that period, and we kind of gave declines of 15%, we're talking over 300 years before the Act of Union between Scotland and England, innovation happens. Yeah, and there's something about crises that actually spurs innovation. And that's what I meant about this point about, you know, trying to solve the problems of this artificial environment to make it real. And one of the really interesting things I'm thinking is, so 80% of people are using their local parks now. You know, 80% of people are using video technology for communicative purposes. We are slow. Before, we were almost sleepwalking in what we used for technology, and what, you know, I think it is forcing us to think more rigorously and more seriously about what do we get out of the real world, the physical world, and what do we get out of the digital world, you know, and that can only be a good thing if we can use those tools and those assets in ways that are more meaningful for us as individuals and for commercial entities like as well. Now, moving on to the next slide, all this hinges really on the ability to work from home. And the one thing I do want to get across is that trends are important. And more important than trends are the way that those trends actually hit people and affect people. And even more important than that is, trends do not affect everyone equally. And it's the uneven impact of those trends that are really important. So take a classic one like we're seeing with what we have here is the suitability to home working based on your skill. And by the size of the bubble is the number of people that work there. This is for the UK. You can clearly see a skills bias to working from home. In fact, of the jobs that are suitable for home working, just 6% are low-skilled jobs, and actually they tend to be in call centres. In actual fact, and this therefore has ethnicity differences, it has gender differences. For men in particular, it tends to be high-skilled work. For women, it tends to be a mixture of high-skilled and medium-skilled kind of work. But, you know, what we're seeing here is it's the skills factor that then has other kind of impacts across. And one of the, you know, and this is what I think is so important for Jersey, actually, when you think about it, when I've hinted at before, with the limitations of space that Jersey has, suddenly companies around the world are much less inhibited by space, much less inhibited by geography. If we are going to be working from home much more, that pool of workers just got global. And not just global in terms of geography, but global in terms of people that may not have been able to kind of actively go to work on a commute every day for whatever reason, caring, whatever it happens to be. So done well, as I say, done thoughtfully, it opens up opportunity. So for Jersey becomes the hub, but not necessarily so limited by the spatial factors that it would happen, in a sense, in a world where we couldn't do this. And you can see the geographic spatial aspects on the next slide, actually. So here we have those jobs, because those jobs aren't evenly distributed across the UK, they tend to be clustered around major centres. You can see here that these areas, are going to be very differently affected. In a sense, what we're seeing is a remittance of income from a virtual office elsewhere, and particularly men who will be much more focused on their local area, both from a cognitive perspective, but also from a commercial perspective, could probably change also a political focus as well. And this, of course, has huge ramifications when we think about the disruption to kind of the travel networks that are caused by the daily commute, the international travel, the tourist travel, the travel because of science and higher education, all these types of things, the ecosystems that are built around that. So there is going to be a profound change, as I say, in a new world. And we need to kind of, in a sense, bridge, the policy needs to bridge to that new world in the way that we are going to work. Also, personally, I think we're going to have a blended model, to be honest. We'll go to work to talk about work. We'll do the most of the work, actually, probably from a different location. The social aspect of work will be where we will be the point of offices. So just very briefly then, and you can see how that affects different sectors differently. Clearly in the hospitality sector hurt quite badly, but the distribution of that hurtness, such a word, is uneven. So take Greggs, a demographic you could argue very different or mildly different from Pret a Manger, more office-based, a different performance. Partly because of their demographics, their key customers, and partly because of the location of where they are, because of their differences in their key demographic. You can see it in the difference between retail parks and shopping centres. Retail parks, open air, good for health, but also focused much more on things for the home. And as everyone's attention becomes much more local, they're doing much better than shopping centres, which are much more experiential and, for example, often have a cinema attached, as we saw the topic of the moment. And the key point, you mentioned Netflix earlier, actually, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll be fairly quick here, right? There was already a tension there. As more subscribers were going to Netflix with cinemas, was that business model always under threat? With the subscription model, which you pay rain or shine, against one which was much more discretionary, which tends to favour more ones where it doesn't kind of rain. Do you see what I mean? So there was always that tension there that COVID has actually just brought out, that acceleration point. And you can see the clear differences here between town centres, larger towns. This one's Wigan here, which hasn't performed well in the deindustrialisation way, actually performing much better because they're self-contained entities, whereas arguably the city of the decade, Manchester, performing much poorer because they rely on that mobility of people. Now, just very briefly, my last slide, I just want to say there are 4 key things I want to share with you that I think are the key themes of COVID, and I think that technology interweaves them all. The one is it resets relationships between ourselves and government, clearly, but also relationships between businesses and their customers. We saw that with the story at the beginning, in terms of much more relational, and tech enables us to build those lasting relationships based on kind of mutual goals rather than, in a sense, a transaction. It repurposes place. We've talked a lot about that, but the focus on what's possible locally, again aided via technology. To reassess value and values, what actually is meaningful for us as individuals and for wider society. We see it with essential workers, key workers, but also, as I say, what customers want out of brands that they feel that they share identity or values with. And lastly, building resilience. It's about firms and individuals modularizing the assets that they have for bespoke purposes, and not just the kind of tangible assets, increasingly actually the wider intangible assets, including people, that are used in ways. And I've got this kind of example here of those that have been able to adapt more quickly, haven't changed the physical assets that they have, but have repurposed those intangible assets that they have much more efficiently. And it's that blending of that which I think will really build resilience as much as financial resilience. Talked very quickly, I overlooked a lot of stuff, so I will stop there and just say thank you and look forward to your questions after the other panelists have spoken. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. As thought-provoking as I'd hoped. Fascinating. I love you basically saying it's just all about watching more television, which explains my couch potato waistline. But also, I like it because actually it was television that got me into technology in the first place. My father was a TV engineer. I remember, I'm that old. I remember him bringing back our first teletext TV one weekend and spending the whole weekend. That was the internet then. So this sort of thing's been changing for a long time. So thank you for that. You've set up the rest of the panel really well. And I'd like to move over to Radhika Chadwick, partner in McKinsey. People in Jersey will know that Jersey has a long-standing relationship with McKinsey. We've done a number of major strategic reviews, particularly around the finance sector, particularly after the last financial crisis. And I got to work with McKinsey only a few years ago, looking at fintech and finance, and came to the very strong conclusion that Jersey needed to be the best international finance centre to work with digitally, which really fits with what Stephen has said. So Radhika specialises in public sector. Just to set the scene slightly, I mean, Jersey, as a small jurisdiction, has a relatively large government, and that's not unusual. And so government, I've noticed in the 5 years I've been here, plays a bigger role in people's lives. And I think, Stephen has said, it resets the relationship, not just with retailers, not just with finance companies, with governments as well. So I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, Radhika.
Thank you very much. Stephen, you're a very tough act to follow because it's almost as if you've taken my best points and made them much better than I could have done. So I'll do my best here. Let me begin with, what Stephen ended with, which was a really thought-provoking view of the 4 themes and how he talks about the impact of technology and innovation and how that has resulted in some winners and some losers. So what I'd like to do is maybe just give you an image of that from my own personal life. So at the end of the summer, my family was one of the several million or so who lost out on quarantine roulette, and we were required to cancel our French holiday and staycation in Devon. And what we saw was a startling tale of 2 cities playing out in the pubs and restaurants around us. 2/3 of the pubs and restaurants in every town were shut, where many were boarded up. The other 1/3 couldn't keep up with the sudden increase in demand with all these tourists that had arrived. And what we saw was they were scrambling to adjust. They were pivoting. They were hustling. We saw friends and family donning aprons, plastic tables suddenly set up outdoors. We saw an army of pizza ovens and Deliveroo scooters buzzing around. So let's keep that image in mind for a few seconds. And what I'd like to do is really talk about some research that we've done recently, 3 very surprising findings from our recent research on how this COVID-19 crisis has impacted technology and innovation. And then I'd like to talk a little bit, and we're talking about what this means in particular for governments. So if I were to start my first slide, am I able to, yeah. Okay, so I guess the first finding from our research is that it is very, very clear that COVID-19 has significantly accelerated digital adoption. It's accelerated the digitization of customer interactions by approximately 3 years globally, in some regions more, in some regions less. And what our research is showing is that during the pandemic, in every geography of the world, consumers have moved dramatically towards online channels. If I were to go to the next slide, oh, fantastic, thank you. What is interesting is within this digital adoption acceleration point, the digitization of products and services globally has accelerated even faster by approximately 7 years globally as an average. And in Asia and the Asia Pacific region, we're looking at an acceleration of more than 10 years. And so what I'd like to point out here is really 3 interesting things. First of all, what this suggests, and I think Stephen was alluding to this as well, is that during this crisis, companies have probably refocused their existing offerings rather than made huge leaps in product development in the span of a few months. The second point is that buried inside this 7-year average number, or 10-year average number if you're in the Asia Pacific region, is, of course, a set of differences between sectors, such as between companies with and without physical products, given that there's a time frame required to make manufacturing changes. So businesses in consumer packaged goods and automotive and assembly, for example, which are very manufacturing heavy, report relatively low levels of change in their digital product portfolios, while businesses in healthcare, pharma, financial services, professional services report a jump nearly twice as large as those in the consumer packaged goods industries. And this acceleration applies, what I found fascinating is that the acceleration applies not just to the customer-facing elements of a business, which you would expect, but also equally to the digitization of core internal operations, your back office digitization, your production digitization, your R&D, your supply chain interactions. So let's move on to the next slide. And the second finding that I'd like to talk about, sorry, are we able to move on to the, yes, there we go. And the second finding, which I find, again, even more startling than the first, is that the acceleration of digital, is that even more startling is the speed at which companies have responded and implemented these changes. So many of these changes, we do this survey year on year. Many of these changes, executives have said for years that it would take X amount of time, very often months, quite often years. And during the crisis, executives are saying that their companies acted 20 to 25 times faster than they ever thought possible. So in the case of remote working, for example, which is that big blue bar, the respondents said that their companies moved 40 times more quickly than they thought possible. They thought it would take approximately, on average, 450 days to implement the kinds of changes that they actually implemented in an average of 11 days when they needed to. And why is it that they were able to do something that they weren't able to accomplish before? Half the respondents said it was never a high enough priority. The other half of the responses included things like, well, we haven't done it before because we feared a customer resistance to change, which obviously has changed in the COVID era, or changes were seen as too big a shock to established ways of working, or we didn't have the technology capabilities. Now, let's move on to the next slide and move on to the third finding. And the third finding is that, and again, this is, I think, where I'm landing, is the third finding is that organizations that experimented with new digital technologies during the crisis are twice as likely to report outsized revenue growth. And I'm thinking of, my experience in Devon. So there's been a growing and substantial body of evidence that companies that do well in a disruption or a transformation almost always have a strong leadership that places digitization at the heart of whatever change they're making, at the very, very heart of their corporate strategies. But I think what's jumping out in this research over the last 6 months is the extent to which this crisis has propelled organizations that have greater technological savvy far beyond their peers who are less willing to embrace technological change and experimentation. And I think if we just move on to one more slide on the same point, what we're really talking about here is a sea change in executive mindsets on the role of technology in business. In this very same survey 3 years ago, half of executives said that the most important priority for their digital strategy was cost savings. Now, more than half say the reason they're investing in technology is for a competitive advantage, or they're refocusing their entire business around digital technologies. And the role of cost savings has dropped to less than 10%. So what is it that these most successful organizations point to as the secret weapon? Well, it's talent, first and foremost, that they invested in pre-crisis digital talent. And secondly, it's an entrepreneurial culture that encourages experimentation with technology. So let me sum up where we are, what this research says, and then let me perhaps take a stab at outlining what I think this means for governments in particular. So this research really adds to historic proportions. The research, let me just repeat that because it's important and I might have gotten cut off there. The research really points to the fact that COVID-19 is a tipping point of historic proportions. The companies that are succeeding in this crisis are those that place technology at the very heart of their business strategies. They invest in technology talent ahead of the curve, and they encourage a culture of innovation. And those that do this surprise themselves by their own capacity to deliver in days what they thought would take months or years, and they outpace their peers very, very quickly in achieving outsized returns. So with that, let me move on to my last slide, which is, given that research and given the image that I began with, what does this mean for national and local governments? So I think it means three things. First of all, I think it means that governments ought to consider doubling down on incentivizing technological progress within their key industries, in particular the service-based and low manufacturing sectors. Research shows that innovation is the main driver of a country's long-term economic growth, and yet companies in free market economies are hugely likely to underinvest in R&D because the individual firm that bears all the risk and cost for developing a new solution, but it's competitors that end up reaping many of the benefits by either imitating the invention or waiting until a patent runs out. And that's where the role of government comes in, whether it's through offering tax incentives for R&D, whether it's promoting free trade, whether it's supporting skilled migration, whether it's training workers in STEM fields or providing direct grants for R&D. Really doubling down on how best to incentivize technological progress is I think, a really key point that jumps out at me. I would say the second thing that jumps out at me is that governments need to recognize that as a key economic buyer, their own behaviors can dramatically shape the local market. So when a government embraces digitization of its services and its operations, I think it creates a quadruple benefit to the economy. So as a government, you can drop your transactional cost to serve dramatically and reinvest funds towards more innovation and towards more economic value creation. But secondly, each time you improve your services, and you can improve them dramatically through digitization, it creates not just a better citizen experience, but it also reduces the bureaucratic load on businesses. And we know that that bureaucratic load, can be a particularly high proportion of your administrative budgets for new and small businesses, which then discourages innovation. I think there's a triple benefit there because as a government, you can stimulate the market to employ and train more people in digital and technology skills. And we know that this quickly creates a natural uplift effect through the entire educational supply chain. And then I think there's a quadruple benefit because government is a giant employer, and it sounds to me like that is also the case in Jersey. So countries that push their own public sector agencies towards technological reinvention tend to spur a much stronger nationwide culture, as you see in countries like Singapore, of accepting and supporting technological progress and entrepreneurialism. And then the final point that I'll make is that recognizing that we're in a fast-changing environment, the pace of innovation and change is unlikely to slow, and the cost of poor policies or even inaction can be devastating in a world that's very quickly polarizing between the winners and the losers. I think governments need to speed up their policy making, and one of the fastest ways to get real data on what's working and what's not working is to engage in direct dialogue with your industries and set up the conditions for a really productive exchange of ideas and concerns. So with that, let me just go back to the image right at the start. We've long talked about an alphabet of recoveries. We talked about a V-shaped recovery. We talked about a U-shaped recovery. We talked about a W recovery. For a while, we talked about not recovering and being in an internal L. The alphabet that I subscribe to is this idea of a K-shaped future. And I think it's clearly seen playing out in that little town in Devon. The pubs that had innovated, the ones that had invested in talent and technology, were on the upward arm of that K. And the ones that didn't or couldn't are on the downslope. And I think, this in a nutshell is the challenge for governments. I'll stop there. And I'm, very, very interested in hearing what Nancy and others think, we ought to be doing as a society to help manage that K-shaped recovery and get as many organizations onto the upward arm as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radhika. Although I'm slightly worried if anyone from government is watching, they'll think I fed you a few of those lines at the end because it's music to our ears at Digital Jersey. So we'll come back to you in the Q&A, and just a reminder of people watching, if you have any questions, put them on the stream now and we'll see if we can get to them at the end. So finally, turning to Nancy, what can I say about Nancy? She used to be my boss, for those of you who don't know. One of the best bosses I've had. I can't see her blushing from here. She also introduced me, and Radhika talked about an entrepreneurial culture. She introduced me to a startup culture after years of corporate life, and I hope I've at least remembered a bit of that. She also introduced me to espresso martinis one night in Barcelona, but we won't say any more about that right now. And while she composes herself, when I saw a few years ago that Nancy had got involved with Carlsberg as Chief Digital Officer, I thought, what on earth does Carlsberg need a Chief Digital Officer for? So I'm assuming, Nancy, you only need a few minutes because it's just to say your job is just to get Carlsberg lots of Facebook likes. Is that true?
Pretty much the case, Tony. Yeah, as you can imagine. Not quite, but hopefully I can tell you a little bit about that right now. So shall I dive in? And I really will try to be quite quick in going through this. But, I sort of took the topic, what on earth has digital got to do with beer? And Stephen and Radhika have given me two very hard acts to follow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it back into the entirely practical and talk about what a large CPG like Carlsberg, with 90 plus breweries around the world, 30 big markets, our biggest market being China, Russia being huge, but all over Western Europe, Central and Eastern Europe and Asia. What does digital really mean for Carlsberg? And I thought I'd address it sort of through the lenses of, why digital business transformation is important. What do we want to achieve? And, how are we going to do it? And please take all of this in the context that this is a strategy. I was a part of the board at Carlsberg as a non-exec for 2 years. And then 2.5 years ago, my boss, our chief exec, convinced me to come to the other side of the table and help answer some of the questions that a big CPG has, rather than just rather annoyingly asking them in the boardroom. So this predates COVID, but you can take for absolute red that really COVID has seen about 5 years of acceleration in digital over the last 6 months from a Carlsberg perspective. So why is digital important? Well, it's absolutely simple. The consumer has changed. And, as Stephen says, he's been watching a lot more telly. Actually, I haven't been watching any more telly whilst I've been locked down on my farm here in the Surrey Hills. I have been absolutely, sort of absorbed in Teams meetings and Zoom meetings from, very early in the morning until pretty late at night. So actually, digital has become even more consuming for me, for my work life and my business life. But if we look at an internet minute in 2020, I mean, it's obvious that, we have to go where the consumer is. And actually, I'd go so far as to say, we think this is just how consumers are behaving. Actually, it's exactly how our customers are behaving as well, especially when you play into an on-trade environment like we do, bars, restaurants, pubs. Actually, this is largely a very fragmented set of really important customers and partners who are individual business owners, and they act just like consumers do. And the reality is that actually technology is so rapid and continuous, the change. Actually, it is a new normal. Even before COVID, we've just seen it accelerated now. And in this sort of world ruled by change, not being able to adapt, that's the killer problem for any of those big organizations like Carlsberg. And of course, it goes without saying that we are not alone doing this. Our competitors are doing this. Companies like McKinsey and BCG and many, many others are all making, I'm sure their bottom lines look a lot more profitable because they are helping many of us to think through, these very challenging issues. So, when it comes to digital, what were our options? Doing nothing doesn't seem that attractive. We all know the fate of Blockbuster and many others. Re-articulating our vision is a pretty big call for most CPGs. You can take the example of a Domino's, where, of course, they no longer see themselves as a pizza company. They see themselves very much as a technology company that just happens to deliver pizza. That's not quite where we were as Carlsberg. So what we did was we really said, look, let's recognize our core strength and let's build on top of that. So when I think about that core strength, you know, we're very much founded over 170 years ago by J.C. Jacobsen, an incredible entrepreneur himself, with many sort of Nobel Prize winning scientists around him. You know, it was really, for me, a couple of years ago, thinking about how do we now apply digital and digitally enhanced technologies to support us when we're actually brewing for a better today and tomorrow. Carlsberg has an enormous focus on giving back to Danish society and indeed global society in the markets where we operate. So, you know, what exactly is it that, you know, we want to achieve? Well, you know, this is a pretty classic framework in terms of how CPGs think about their digital programs. You know, ultimately, we want to develop a business strategy that is enabled by digital. This is definitely not thinking about digital in a silo. And then there are many different areas where we think about digital and its role in our business. We think about all the ways that we can improve efficiency by digitalizing the core. That could be digital marketing, it could be digital route to market, it could be things that we're doing in supply chain. We, of course, think about growth. How do we accelerate our growth? That has been very elusive for most big CPGs in the last several years. Where we used to rely on mass media, now where is the growth opportunity? And of course, there are some great examples in there when we think about, you know, online to offline, that last mile delivery, the Deliveroos, Just Eats, and so on. But then at the bottom, we also think about what's it going to take to actually be able to enable any of this. You know, how do we drive effectiveness via some critical enablers? We often work on highly fragmented ERP systems. We've got to sort of figure out how to configure some of that legacy technology and create these very harmonized kind of data layers to sit on top and power a lot of this ecosystem that we're developing. Of course, we have to change the ways of working. We have to come from working in functions or silos to a much more collaborative and agile approach. And we also need to make sure how we're part of the ecosystem overall. How do we develop some brilliant new partnerships? And I won't get into any of the details here, but you can see it's actually something of a rather terrifying sort of slide to look at here. These are just a selection of the top digital priorities for CPGs. I mean, there's a real danger that you could really, frankly, boil the ocean here and get very, you know, really not get very far or create too much impact. So I think the important thing is to be quite focused and to really think about, you know, how do I make sure that I deliver in 3 dimensions? And we always think about this particular lens. We think about having very much a value lens. So actually, how am I going to transform the bottom line and the top line in the business by actually utilizing data, technology, and new ways of working, i.e. digital, in the business? We always take a customer-centric lens, and that's quite challenging for a big CPG. We've been very good at thinking about the consumer and trying to innovate our liquids and indeed our marketing to appeal to a mass media in the past. But actually, now we really have to get into the individual. How do we make sure that that end user, the customer or the consumer, is really delighted with what we're doing? And finally, we obviously have to think about those capabilities, and we have to think about actually how do we build the capabilities into our organizations so that we can absolutely, you know, continue our journey and be credible around that. So, I mean, when I thought about it, and I'm a pretty simple woman, as Tony said, I'm an entrepreneur. I've also spent half of my career as a corporate citizen, but I thought about it very simply and visually like this in my first weeks as an exec at Carlsberg. If we think about the entire value chain, from planning through brewing and processing, right through to when we interact with the consumer, there are huge value pools that we can tap into, where using digital, we can really make a big impact in the business. So let me maybe show you kind of a few examples of, how we do that. I mean, first and foremost, I think I've alluded to this already, but we cannot simply scale up all of these projects in every function and every market from the get-go. So we start with a series of scattered experiments. They're often very market-centric. We're quite a federal organization. We then build lighthouses where we're with more of a theme, if you like, consistent across the business. And then we come to something of a program, and that's where we start scaling things up. Now, I'm going to just talk for another minute or two, but I thought I'd just give you a taste of what some of those things might look like, because I think it's all very well to talk about a CPG and its supply chain or in its route to market, but what does that mean? Well, if I look at our supply chain, one of the things that we've been doing in some of our markets is really using machine learning to actually achieve a real step change in how we forecast demand by using machine learning, far more data sources. And you can see on this chart, you can make a very substantial impact, perhaps another 4 to 18 percentage points in accuracy in forecasting demand, which means we can then delight the consumer by having the right products on the right shelves in the right places, whether those are virtual or physical, at the right time. And that has some real benefits for the business in terms of how we can focus our efforts on other value-adding tasks. We can lift our revenues at the same time, but we can also save a bunch of money. I think there are other things, and I'm going to whiz really quickly here, whether it's in our breweries, when we can use, IoT in our production and packaging lines to actually improve our overall equipment efficiency by predicting breakdowns rather than just reacting to them. We can also think about, how do we actually predict when our customers might churn? Let's offer great service to them, but let's also understand how we really put the right sort of tactics and strategy in place to delight them. Of course, e-commerce has to be huge, whether it is dealing direct with our customers, so we're more convenient, more available to them when they choose, or whether it's that whole waterfront of e-commerce, whether we're dealing with marketplaces in China, the likes of JD and Ali, or like I say, whether in B2C, we're dealing with some of the new last mile delivery platforms. There's an awful lot that we're focused on across the business. We also have some genuine innovation, things like our draft beer system, Draft Master. It comes away from steel kegs, it's recyclable plastic, many advantages in terms of freshness, quality, but actually by putting IoT and sensors inside this equipment, it means we can create some very exciting functionality for our partners, where, for instance, you can see in this little animation here that actually you have an iPad as a bartender and you can see exactly how much liquid is left in the keg. So no more worrying about when do I have to change that keg and it's a busy time. We can also send our technicians out to clean and replace equipment without you calling us in. And I think my genuine message that I want to put across is there's a lot going on. It can't be in a silo. What we have to think about is it's not a digital strategy, it's a strategy that is digital. So, I absolutely would say that digital is the economy, and very excited to hear about all of the great ambitious plans that you have in Jersey.
Great, thanks, Nancy. So basically, the message is, your role is to make sure we don't run out of beer. And I think that's a mission statement everyone can get behind. It's in 2020 or other years as well. So thanks, guys. We've got time for a few questions. One of the themes that's come out of some of the questions I've seen, and you've touched upon it, each of you, do you think that digital resilience post-COVID is going to become just as important as digital transformation, both inside companies, governments, everything? Not sure who wants to go first. Stephen?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yes, and I think part of a much wider, we haven't really touched on it, but when we talk about issues of data and identity, issues of data ethics, the resilience in terms of how do we manage, particularly those companies that hold an awful lot of customer data and sensitive customer data as well. Okay, financial institutions. All of these things need, are a separate topic in their own right. But also, just to pick up on something that, to use the phrase of the day, that is interwoven or connected each of our kind of talks this morning. is the need for modularization, in the sense of, and it's really interesting to say that, that it isn't a kind of a digital strategy, it's a strategy that is kind of digital, is that I think we're each trying to say is that, the future isn't just having one particular focus and then just doing that. There's a different need. You have to kind of modularize what you're doing, bring a skill set of different people, of different technologies, and the way that we use technologies in different ways to solve different problems. We're just at the foothills of this. One of the big problems that we have is that, and I'll just very briefly on this, is that at the moment we're still using technology in a kind of still too bespoke way. We're still early in this, right, here's a bit of software that does this particular thing, rather than understanding that its application can be probably much wider than it is, and therefore more universal, and therefore have much more value, and therefore tradable, and therefore be able to kind of lend against this type of asset. Us understanding it as a pure asset in a more kind of accounting and legal framework. All of these things build into an understanding of what kind of resilience is. And as I say, we're at the very beginning of a journey rather than at the end of one.
Yeah, I mean, Tony, I would also just say on this that, this is hard, right? So I think resilience is not just about our workforce and how we help, our colleagues not burn out from 11 hours of Teams meetings a day. But I think also there are no silver bullets. So even though COVID has given us a real sort of shot in the arm, actually this takes real investment over time, patience, enormous collaboration. And I think from a leadership perspective, clearly we have extremely smart people in our organizations who are often incredibly unfamiliar with many of the, new types of technology and new ways of working. So, I think resilience is really required, and probably, parking your ego at the door to really make sure that we can commit to this journey, because this isn't a moment in time with COVID. This is here to stay. And we need to just really embrace the acceleration that we've been gifted. And I think really be resilient and be determined, about the path that we're on, because I think that is the way that we actually create the companies of the future and how we do delight our consumers and customers.
And Radhika, do you think governments are set up for that sort of acceleration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really, really interesting question, because if you think about resilience from the perspective of a government, I mean, it isn't just about the resilience of your systems, it's actually the resilience of your economy to shocks and the rate of technological progress, and it's the resilience of your people as well. This is a giant agenda, and I worry that it is too big an agenda for governments to tackle in sort of the old way, which is very much, there is a government agenda and we figure it out and we do it. And one of the trends that we've seen at Davos this year, one of the key trends, is that corporations, the private sector, are taking on roles that were traditionally seen as government roles. They're becoming educators. They're making commitments to lifelong learning. So, I think if we are going to bring that resilience, that digital resilience, but also that economic and that people resilience in, there has to be far greater working between governments and the private sector, because those lines are blurring. Those lines have to blur because the agenda is getting far too large for us to be able to contain within a traditional view of, tax revenues and government expenditure and government responsibilities.
So my next question is, I'm going to be a bit hard-faced, as Nancy knows I can be sometimes, and ask for some free advice from each of you. So, as Stephen's already said, Jersey is not a huge place, 45 square miles, just over 100,000 people. We can't do everything. But we're already an international finance centre. We were the birthplace of some great startups in their time, like WorldPay. And this is going to sound like a Carlsberg advert. It's not meant to be, but we now probably have the fastest internet in the world. So where do you think Jersey should focus in a digital world? We haven't got long, but if you can keep your answers fairly brief, but I'd love to get your views. Stephen?
So as I said in my talk, you have been given the greatest freedom, but technology offers you the greatest freedom from the limitation that you've had, which was space. So it's now really up to the people of Jersey and the government of Jersey to make that happen. So it is about, when I've spoken in kind of forums like this before, there's no need to focus on, you can now tap into the best universities in the world. You can get the best people in the world. It's about, creating that environment. It's really interesting what has been said, which is that, we can no longer do things in isolation. It is about the partnerships that we have. So freed from the shackles of space, it's about understanding what are the partnerships and the skills that enables kind of Jersey to thrive. And that really is your role, actually, is central to that, which is about cementing the kind of digital and wider technological skills that will enable that to happen.
Radhika?
Yeah, so I think the point that I would make, Tony, is that one of the things that people don't often recognize about the digitization journey is that it gets exponentially more difficult with scale. So the bigger you are as a company, the bigger you are as a country, the more difficult digitization is. And I reflect back to a conversation you and I had just a week ago where you told me that Jersey has a population of about 100,000 people and tax revenues of just shy of about 800 million a year, 800 to 900 million a year, and government expenditure is about the same. And what occurs to me is that's a very small population size. It's a very high rate of expenditure on government services. And therefore, given that you've got a very small population, the digitization ought not to be as difficult as it would be in a larger country. You're looking at, many things, dare I say it, that could be digitized relatively quickly and release a huge amount of hidden value. So my advice would be recognize that, with 100,000 people, you're very lucky in a way in the speed at which and the flexibility with which you can genuinely digitize very quickly using technologies that are mature and will pay back very, very fast.
Thank you. And finally, Nancy?
Well, I think Radhika and Stephen gave you great advice. I think that mine is more cultural rather than precisely where to focus. But I think you guys are doing a great job. And I think that actually recognizing what you're doing and making sure that you're delivering in pieces real end user value. I love the broadband example. That's real end user value for those taxpayers in Jersey, and kind of recognize and celebrate the success along the way, because it is hard, as I've said, the journey, but it can be very high impact. So I'd say keep up the good work, Tony.
Well, look, thank you so much. I'm tempted to use my authority to say I want another hour, but my head of marketing is really scary, so I'm not that brave. But I do have in my head when we reopen, I'm thinking of hiring the Jersey Opera House and having the three of you on stage when we get you down here and carrying on this audience. So it only remains me to say thank you so much. And as Stephen knows, guys, there is no escape from Digital Jersey. Once you get involved in something, that's it, you're trapped. Thank you very much yet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hold you to that. The idea of having this panel reconvene in the coming months to talk even more. I listened to that all day. The research, the theory, the practical application. And what was that new motto for the day? Not a digital strategy. It's a strategy that's digital. And that's why digital is the economy.
Not just about the digital industries, it's about every industry actually needing those digital skills.
I think we're all invested in the digital sector and trying to diversify the economy a bit. And if we can do that by transitioning people from different sectors into the digital sector, we think that's only going to be good for the island long term.
More firms are looking to invest in technical skills and innovation. Jersey is actually a real hotbed of digital and technology.
Tell you what, learning lots by the minute. This is Jersey Tech Week. We are on to day 4, this session for another hour. This afternoon, we're talking creativity as well. But Tony, you've been absorbing what you've been hearing during the course of this morning. Let's just reflect on that. There is so much to unpack here. Another line, I was just noting down, there were so many things that I lost track, but experimenting with tech during COVID, putting digitization at the heart of the strategy, and those that did that are already reaping the fruits of their labour.
Well, you ran a great session on, was it Tuesday morning? Feels longer ago now, doesn't it? Where we saw how Jersey used technology to get through COVID. And it wasn't just the amazing broadband, and we had the 3 telcos which have done an amazing job for Jersey. We saw how organisations are coping with it. I know for myself from working in government on the testing and tracing, technology was a really key part of that, not just the testing technology. It was getting people to fill in their information before they flew here. It was actually getting the test results back and into a database, and the contact trace, that amazing video about our contact tracing team, which is just amazing in a small place like Jersey. So we've really seen this year, you know, probably it's accelerated the things I've been nagging people about in Jersey about being more digital. It's accelerated that 5 years in 5 months as well.
Tony, never stop the nagging. We love it. However, there is an unfortunate byproduct of your nagging, and that is we don't necessarily have the workforce that entirely matches the needs of the workplace. That skills deficit, that skills shortage, however you describe it, is, I mean, it's not just a Jersey issue, it's a worldwide issue, but an opportunity right now if Jersey nails this.
We're not alone in that, but as a small island, limited sized population, low unemployment generally. I mean, obviously taking a bit of a hit this year, but actually we can do something about it. We can be nimble and agile, as some of the speakers just said. And I'm proud of lots of things in Digital Jersey, but one of the particular things I think we did really well on was our digital skills strategy. So we went from working with the University of Exeter Business School to develop a digital skills strategy for Jersey, evidence-based, interviewing companies, interviewing people in the education system. And we went from publishing that strategy to opening the Digital Jersey Academy in less than 18 months. We developed a digital leadership program with our partners, Target Internet. We're going to hear from them soon as well. And now Jersey has a degree equivalent course that's on the Ofqual register in the UK. That's brand new to Jersey. We're seeing increasing numbers of people go through the academy, and they're learning about technology, but they're also learning about digital leadership. Nancy talked about entrepreneurialism. That's really key. We don't want to just think about the silos of whether, you know, you're in finance, you're in hospitality, you're in digital. We want people to think up the next businesses. You know, at the beginning of the week, we had Nick Ogden. He set up a company in Jersey in the 90s, which was sold for tens of billions of dollars last year. Now, isn't that amazing? So if it can be done once, it can be repeated and repeated.
Well, I think Nick did it for me earlier in the week, and you've done it now, which is just firing me up with enthusiasm for all of these things. And digital skills as an issue is something that is pressing right now. It is at the heart of the strategy for Jersey right now. But how do we bridge that divide between what the current skill set is and what the current skill set and definitely future skill set ought to be? Well, Geek Talent have been investing a lot of time and energy in that. And Dominic Murphy, I'm hoping, appears by magic right now. Dominic, a very good morning to you. How are you?
Fantastic, Gary. Thanks for having us today. Really appreciate it.
It's lovely to have you here. Welcome to Jersey Tech Week. We are all glued to what you're about to say, so it's all yours.
Brilliant. All right, thanks, Gary. So thank you all. I've been watching the previous talks with interest over the week. So what I'm going to share today is some of the work that we've done with Jersey in partnership with Digital Jersey and Skills Jersey. And what we did is we've analysed the skill needs of industry, specifically in Jersey, but we've got the wider UK context to share today as well. And then we're also going to talk about some mega trends. We're going to talk about key findings, just to contextualise where Jersey is as an economy at the moment. And then I'm going to talk about the skills of the near term, and then I'll be chairing the panel after this, talking about the skills of the future, looking further ahead. So hopefully it's very practical, looking at what the economy looks like at the moment, and then looking at the how digital the economy is, and then hopefully I'll be sharing some of the Rosetta Stone of the translation that we need to do between industry and education, and particularly around when we talk about skills. What skills exactly are we talking about? What capabilities do we need to train for? And then we'll be going into the panel as well. So what we'll start off with is the report, the research report that we did. We interviewed over 60 different people from 40 businesses on the island. We reached out from a wide range of financial services firms, agriculture, hospitality, retail. We covered the whole economy. So I'm going to give you a little glimpse of that over the next few minutes. And then I'm going to talk about some things that are really affecting the wider global job market that we need to be, which are both an opportunity and a concern for growing and where digital can really add value in the future. So in terms of the report, let's just go ahead and move into it. So the goals of the work that we carried out, and we carried this work out a few months ago, and the report is published on the Digital Jersey website. You can go and download the report and get into a bit more detail. What you can see from here is there's a number of different areas that were goals for the report. One is to really explain what the digital sector is. If you're not in the digital sector, and I know we've talked about, digital is the economy here. So it's just a case of how digital is the firm rather than are you a digital firm anymore? And we heard that from Carlsberg and others today. But we really need to explain the different types of career pathways that exist, and particularly for those people who are not au fait with technology and digital roles. It's not just all about software developers. It's not just all about data scientists. So what are the different career pathways? If I'm from a creative background, or if I'm from a linguistics background, if I've got from a hospitality sector, how do I become more digital? So that's part of the goals that we did, that we delivered and set out to address. Some of it was particularly around where do we develop curriculum, how do we support people to develop, particularly through the digital academy, but also looking at the wider education system, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then providing a capability. What we do as a company is we track every single job ad globally that's posted with our partners in, for example, in Indeed and Adzuna as well. And what we have is a finger on the pulse of the job market. What does the democracy of the internet say around CV and job ad data? What skills are people developing in their CVs, and what are companies asking for? And what we do is just simplify that through our platform. So we provide that ongoing monitoring and tracking as a capability. And then really, when we talk about productivity and skills, what is the gap? When we talk about increasing productivity through digital, what digital skills are we talking about? And then the final bit really is looking at how digital different sectors are. So how digital is the agriculture sector? How digital is the hospitality sector, for example? And then again, transferable skills are huge. So it's about, everybody has a different view of what transferable skills are. We have a definition of them, but there are some transferable skills which are, I would say, better than others. Some that are linked to low pay and high pay. So hopefully I'll give you some insight as well. So just in terms of context of the labour market environment within Jersey, so what does it look like? So what you can see here is all the way back up until pre-pandemic. So we've modelled this up until the pre-pandemic. What I would say is, as of September, we are seeing a bit of a V-shaped recovery within Jersey. So it was relatively slow after March, but we are seeing a bit of a V-shaped recovery. So what this is showing me, this is the shape of the job market. How much of the job market, if we take all of the jobs that are advertised for back until 2019 to pre-pandemic in March, how much share of the market was hospitality? You can see here there's some seasonality in the job market. So around May, around August, and around January, you can see the spikes around the hospitality sector where it's growing and asking for more demand. But you can see here's a whole range of different sectors that we're tracking here. Obviously, financial services is a big part of the economy, but also so was retail. So it is good that, particularly for Jersey, that the hospitality sector and retail can reopen in a controlled way. So that was a big part of the job market. And again, digital's throughout this. What we're looking at is not just about digital on its own as a sector, but how digital are all of the other sectors. Okay, so how digital is the financial services sector? How digital is the hospitality sector? What skills? And they are investing in different skills, and it means different things to those sectors. So hopefully that gives us some labour market context. The other thing that I want to talk about are these mega trends. So what we're seeing is more temporary jobs, more zero-hour contracts. So we've tracked this over the last 18 months. And zero-hour contracts and also gig economy work, temporary jobs. So out of 18 million jobs that were advertised across the whole of the UK last year, up until June 2020, we saw that 2 million of them were gigs. So these are companies recruiting for tasks, people to complete tasks. This could be everything from design work to tech work. It could be building websites. So some of these tasks are highly digital. Now that has two a benefit and an issue for the local economy. So one thing is that drives a decrease in price, a race to the bottom that we call it, in terms of that those gigs are now globally available and can be completed from anybody with an internet connection. The other thing that allows us to do, though, is that we can become a net exporter of knowledge and talent from Jersey. So we can now take part in an economy beyond the borders of Jersey. So now there are jobs and tasks that can be done and delivered digitally. We just need to be able to grab that and be able to deliver those jobs and those tasks. But it is one thing that we would say is the stability of the job market is becoming it's less stable, and more flexibility is being asked for of employers. So we need to really understand that. I think the shift in home work attitudes is a big thing. The one stat that we need to be mindful of, particularly for large city conurbations, is around for every one knowledge worker that doesn't return to the office, it affects 5 other ancillary jobs. So for every one person who doesn't go back to the office, and there's huge announcements from global corporations around, we're not going to go back to the office, or we're going to increase work from home for our staff, for a number of benefits. But we do need to be mindful of the impact of our city centre economies and what that means in the future. The other thing that we found is around digital and data. So digital and data is everything. Whenever we've spoke to all of the businesses on the island, particularly, the thing that comes out is, how do I make more use of data, particularly data skills? And I'm really interested in automating manual processes, whether that be physical processes with the agriculture sector or in construction sector, or whether that's around understanding digital processes such as office automation and process automation, which is a huge part led by the banking system. Now, the other side of it is obviously we're still expecting up until the end of this year to unemployment to peak. So we need to be mindful that we need to reskill a lot of people. So hopefully what I'll talk about today, we can look at how we can reskill using a framework, particularly around digital skills. Okay. So some of the challenges, it's not just all of an upward trend for Jersey. There are some challenges we need to overcome. So we are lagging behind London and Edinburgh, where we compared to about 6 percentage points in terms of how digital the different sectors are, and that's a measurement of which digital skills are asked for within all of the job advertising from employers. We can see at the lower end, we've got things like the social care and health system, which are the lowest level of digital competency and digital skills that are asked for. And then at the higher end, we've got the engineering sector and the creative sector, which is really leading the way in terms of digital skills. So it's a bit of a mixed bag there. Digital employment is pivotal to all sectors of the economy, and it is growing its share of recruitment over the last few years as well. The other thing is around tech purchasing. So if we want companies to increase their digital adoption, we need to support the managers and the senior leaders of those companies to be au fait with buying technology solutions. So that will be a key barrier to technology adoption. The other comment around Jersey is that we do a lot of low volume but high value tasks. So the thing about Jersey is we have lots of sort of smaller organisations, let's say, but we have a huge amount of value that's been generated, but the ability to automate and automate at scale might not be there. But again, I think there are some benefits to look cross sector rather than just within individual sectors. And jobs automation is already happening, so there is a disruption that's happening, but there is an opportunity around automation of jobs and freeing people up from the drudgery of repetitive tasks, improving the health and safety of individuals and jobs. And hopefully there's an opportunity that we need to grab hold of. So what we need to do is embrace automation, not be afraid of it, and we need to support business leaders to onboard automation into their businesses to really increase the productivity, increase their global competitiveness. And the final thing I'll just say is, again, hopefully, this is one that came up time and time again around location and place, around housing. So housing and space obviously is an issue within Jersey, but as we've heard from the previous speakers here, hopefully we can really look beyond the borders and really have a look at what assets we have and how this change of work from home attitudes, and maybe we can do more with the space that we have within Jersey as well, and think of it more globally. So I'm going to talk about digital skills. That's just a bit about the context of the report. So in terms of digital skills, let's just look at the framework. This framework has come from something called the SFIA and DDAT. Government departments in the UK are investing heavily in this. We've worked with people like the Met Police, Ofcom, other consultancy organisations. So this gives us really what we call the Rosetta Stone of digital capabilities. On the left-hand side, we've really got the core facets of digital. So we've got sections like intelligent infrastructure, data engineering and analytics, software engineering, and then the creative side of digital. But all of these capabilities are the building blocks for creating a digital society and for creating digital skills that we can train, develop, and cross-train and develop people into. So we've got a section of 25 skills, everything from designing businesses and processes through to data modeling and analytics and some of the hardcore technology that we know about. I think the goal here isn't necessarily to make every role, everybody a software developer, for example. It's about a broad church of skills that we need to develop. So everything, we need people who can visualize and present. We need people who can do the data analysis. We need people who can gather requirements and model processes. We need people who really understand the business. And the best people to do that are the people working in those businesses today. The key is really to elevate their skills to a level where they can communicate and work effectively with the technologists. So hopefully that gives us a really a key set of skills and capabilities across the economy that we can look for. So the next piece of work that we're embarking on at the moment is really to align education and employment markets. So we're looking at the gap that exists between education and employment at the moment. So taking those capabilities and then mapping them onto the education system, not just the digital courses, but also things like geography, history, the languages. And what we're hoping for here is that we have a common language for skills across industry and the economy and employers. Sometimes it is literally, we just need the translation mechanism. We're talking about the same thing, but we're speaking two different languages. So the capability, the framework here that we have, hopefully that will be one view. It's not the only view. This is the really near-term skills that we need to be developing in people and organisations, but it is backed up by the labour market analysis that we've done, the interviews, the qualitative reviews as well. So what we're doing as next steps as well, I just want to finalise on is there's a few pieces of work here. What we need to do is around influencing choice. So we are launching a programme. We do deliver a careers platform as well. So we're launching a digital careers platform on the island, and that's a mobile and employer app for students, and really about making sure that students are well informed of their choices that are available, not just in Jersey, but in the wider economy as well in the UK. And also they can experience these things through physical or virtual work placements. There'll be a huge amount of events and marketing and CPD that we'll be investing in to make sure that everybody has that finger on the pulse of the jobs market and making them more employable, making sure that they understand the skills that are available and needed in the economy. So that's what I wanted to share today. I'm happy to take any questions from the floor or Gary.
Dominic, I have 1,001 questions, but I know you were about to lead a panel where I'm sure even more questions will be incoming. So I'm going to keep my counsel for now. I'm going to keep my powder dry, and I will return to that offer a little bit later on. Food for thought every step of the way here, and from an individual level, from an educational level, from an employment level, from a governmental and policy level, skills, digital skills, upskilling and reskilling seems to me to be one of the stories of our time. So we saw Dominic over there. I can see Dominic over here. The panel is assembled, and Dominic, it's right back to you.
All right, thank you, Gary. Thank you, everybody, again. So now I'm going to change to panel chair. So what I'd like to do is we're going to debate the future skills. So what I presented before was the really near-term skills and what skills are currently asked for in the economy. What we're now going to talk about is where's the future? Where are we heading to? And a little bit further afield. So we have our esteemed panel guests with us today. We have Wendy Hall. Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. I think I'm becoming quite a regular at these things. Tony Moretta said in the earlier panel that once Digital Jersey gets hold of you, you never let go. My mistake was answering an email from Tony Moretta, and I've ended up on the Digital Jersey board. So there you go. Because unfortunately in COVID, I can't be with you all. And one of my reasons for accepting that invitation was more trips to Jersey. So I've failed all round so far. But I think you don't want to know my history of tourism. I think you want to know that I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Southampton and the executive director of the Web Science Institute. And I've been doing computing for far too many years and seen it all come and go. And I think I'm probably here today, apart from the fact that Tony never lets go of me, is in the nicest possible sense, Tony, is that I co-chaired the UK's AI review, which is all about jobs and skills.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Wendy. And we also have Ali Cambray from PwC. Ali, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, Dom. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ali Cambray and I work here at PwC's advisory consulting practice here in Jersey. I've got a background in sustainable economic development policy and I'm currently coordinating a programme of work on the future economy for Jersey, which upskilling Jersey's workforce for the future is a real central tenet of that. And we've been doing a bit of local research in the market about the opportunity for upskilling as well, which I'll talk about a bit later.
Brilliant, thank you, Ali. And Daniel Rowles, can you introduce yourself as well to the audience?
Thanks, Dom. Good morning, everyone. I'm here with a few hats on today. So I think, first of all, I'm here as CEO of Target Internet. Target Internet is an educational technology company based here in Jersey now. We work very closely with the Chartered Institute of Marketing on something called their digital skills benchmark, where we've gone out and we have tested 5,000 people's skills to work out, not just asking their opinions, but where those skills gaps are. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm also a program director at Imperial College Business School, so I head up the digital transformation, some of the data science and the digital marketing at the business school in London. And then we've launched something here called the Digital Leadership Programme, which Tony alluded to earlier on, which is essentially trying to create an alternative to university that matches the skills requirements in industry to what young people are going to be studying, but giving them the skills to either be successful entrepreneurs or the leaders of the future. And that is, as you spoke about, Dom, a kind of mix of tech, creative, leadership, and it is that kind of broad set of skills. So be very interested to listen to the rest of the panel.
Brilliant, thank you. And again, you know, we want to make sure that we give you all a chance to give us your view. That's what you're here for. That's what the audience want to hear. They want to hear your view, particularly around the future. What I presented really was around the near future and now. What are people looking for in the job market? So in terms of the approach for now for the panel, what I'd like to do is give you each 10 minutes. To give us your perspective on the future and around skills and highlight any fantastic work that you're leading and that you're involved with. So we've heard a lot around digital transformation, but that's not really going to happen without employees and residents to have the digital skills to either be an effective employee or an effective consumer of technology. So can we start with Ali? Can you give us your view of the skills that we'll all need in the future to support this digital transformation that's happening in industry and society?
Sure, thanks, Dom. I think I'll start this off by coming at the perspective of this from two pieces of research that we've done at PwC recently. So the first one, some of you might be familiar with it if you're if you're here in Jersey. We published a report this summer on the impact of automation on the Channel Islands, and that estimated that around 30% of jobs in the Channel Islands and in Jersey in particular are at risk at some point between now and 2035 of change, of some kind of implication of automation as the island moves forward, the different waves of automation. And just to break that down a little bit more for everyone, there'll be around 2,000 jobs at risk pretty much immediately now, kind of ongoing, due to what we call the algorithmic wave of automation, which is around automating repetitive tasks. But a much larger number, probably around 8,000 jobs in Jersey, at risk from the augmentation wave. And that is the sort of wave that comes after that, probably between now and 25 to 30 rather, which is where technology is working hand in hand with employees. So very different skill set required. And then finally, almost about another 7,000 jobs we estimated in the final autonomous wave. And that's across all sectors. There are some differences in different sectors, but this is a key point. This isn't just about financial services. It does affect all different sectors of the economy here in Jersey in different ways. That might sound scary to some people, but flip it around, it's also an opportunity, because we think that just as many, if not more jobs, are going to be created as a result of this automation shift, this transformation of the digital economy. And the challenge is for somewhere like Jersey to make sure that those jobs are actually created here in Jersey and that they're not in competitor jurisdictions that are already building the markets and building the skills of employees to harness that. And this is really key. First of all, when we think about how much of our financial services industry here is branches of firms that are headquartered elsewhere, they're kind of international. We need to make sure that our skilled workforce here as an island is a reason for them to continue to stay. And we also need to think about other jobs in other types of sectors, retail, hospitality, construction. If some of those types of jobs or the types of roles within those jobs fall away, how do we make sure that we are supporting those people to move, to shift their skills in the way you were talking about earlier, Dom, to move into other types of roles or even transferable skills into other sectors on the island? And this is really critical. We really need to make sure that as an island, we avoid what some people called a digital divide, a scenario where without action, this drives greater inequality and perhaps links back to that K-shaped recovering that the first panel were talking about. We really need to make sure that no one's left behind here. So to your point about the skills, what kind of skills do we need to develop as employees, as companies, as an island to harness this opportunity? Very broadly, and this is an oversimplification, the types of roles that employees will be able to harness and take as an opportunity fall broadly into three kinds of buckets. The first one is roles around sort of personal care and direct customer interaction, where you've got a key customer service interaction on the island that has to be face-to-face for some kind of reason, or because it's around local convenience and kind of local requirements. The second bucket then is around where you're lifting away a lot of the repetitive tasks. You are creating more opportunity for everyone to provide higher level strategy and decision making skills, and that's absolutely critical to the future direction of our knowledge economy, including financial services, but more broadly on the island. And then the third, last but by no means least, and this really sort of reflects a lot of what you were talking about earlier, Dom, is all the skills that are going to be required for managing and making sense of these automated processes. The data scientists, the cybersecurity, the data governance, and a whole host of other skills that you had on your sort of slides before. And then I guess addition to that, there's also this concept of sort of digital nomads, again, that was touched on earlier, where you've got a great opportunity for people from Jersey to potentially access roles right across the globe. They're not just constrained to the island anymore. So that's the kind of picture of the type of job roles. What exact type of mix of skills are then required for people to take the opportunities of those roles? Well, there's one particular example. We've worked in a number of different jurisdictions, helping governments and economies thinking through exactly just that. And I can talk about exactly what we did around that perhaps a bit later. But the key point of one of the jurisdictions we worked in, Luxembourg, quite recently, was that there was a key and sort of intense period of market engagement and detailed analysis that led to the development of an upskilling program for the economy that had a really interesting split. About 50% of the upskilling was digital skills, about 20% was specific technical skills to the particular jobs and roles, but 30%, absolutely critically, 30% of the skills were soft skills. And that really leads me on to the second piece of research, if I've got time just to share just briefly. We also do a lot of, as you can probably imagine, we do lots of regular surveys of global CEOs and C-suite executives around the world about different trends, and particularly around kind of skills. And what was really interesting is that as we were surveying companies globally and CEOs over this summer, reflecting what the pandemic was meaning for their organisations and the types of skills and behaviours that they were feeling were becoming increasingly critical for them as businesses to move forward. There's a real change in the type of behaviours and the type of skills that they're looking for, and it really speaks to this soft skills piece. So the types of skills now that are going to be absolutely critical for us to think about as a jurisdiction, as employees, are things like resilience. We've talked about that a little bit already this morning. Communications, critical thinking, adaptability, empathy, leadership, creativity, teaming, judgment and decision making. And it's really interesting when you ask these CEOs how good they think their organisations are at the moment at these type of skills. The answer is, well, not very. Around 30%, between 30 and 40% of them feel that they currently have sufficient skills in areas like collaboration and creativity and coaching. So this is a real sense of a kind of mindset shift for organisations and for employees, and a real opportunity to think about how we deliver skills quite differently, perhaps from a more traditional curriculum, which is more focused on technical knowledge skills. This is around soft skills and creativity just as much as those other skills. So I'll stop there. Hope that's a helpful overview.
Ali, wonderful. Again, same question to Wendy. Can you give us your view of the future around skills development for society and employees?
Well, it'll be a sort of a different take, and I'm not quite sure why I'm on this panel, but I think it's because they want me to talk about AI. I mean, I'm not an expert at all on Jersey. I'm beginning to learn a lot. But my expertise is what's happening in the UK and the rest of the world around the development of artificial intelligence, which, of course, you can't, well, I was going to say you can't do artificial intelligence you can't apply it without the digital. Actually, you probably can, because I'm about to say that anyone can get into the application of artificial intelligence. You don't have to be a digital person to do that. So I'll come back to that. But I see this, I advise governments all over the world in terms of where and how to adopt AI. And today, AI is very much about machine learning, and I don't want to go into detail, but when I was a young lecturer, AI was about expert systems and rule-based decisions, and before I was a lecturer, it was all about philosophy. So it's trying to build machines that could think as well as humans. That's not what it's about at the moment. Today, it's all about machines learning from data, and huge amounts of data. And the reason that it's hitting us all in the face at the moment is because we have a lot of compute power and a lot of data, and we've had 30 years of development, at least 30 years of development of machine learning, and those three things are coming together in a world that is creating an explosion of potentially the application of AI in our world, which is both an opportunity and has some threats. So I was asked by the Theresa May government in 2017 to co-chair a review of artificial intelligence for the UK. And that review was picking up on Alice, was it Ali? I'm sorry, the lady from PwC. I haven't been on too many panels this week, I'm so sorry. That review was meant to look to the future about how the UK could build its economy, how AI could help the UK build its economy, and how we could create jobs, rather than sitting in a world where all the forecasts were that, there were a lot of forecasts at the time from companies like PwC saying there are going to be losses of jobs and automation. And as you said, over time, there will be digital and AI will create far more jobs than we have at the moment over time, but there will be losers in the short term. And the key thing about where the UK sits, and I'm going to talk about where Jersey sits in a minute, but the key thing, well, Jersey sits as a small island off the coast of the UK, which is a small island off the coast of Europe, and basically we sit as a small island, this is the UK, in the face of the two superpowers in AI and in the digital, if you think of it in terms of the datagopolis of the US and China. And that was very much, the geopolitical thing was very much a driver for this review that I was asked to co-chair in 2017. And the exciting thing is the UK is 3rd in the global index of AI, which I think, considering the size of our island and our population, is absolutely amazing. And one of the reasons for that is we have a fabulous legacy in everything digital, of course. The World Wide Web was invented by an Englishman, and we were one of the first countries to use the internet properly, or to use the internet, the proper internet. We have that legacy in terms of Alan Turing, right, from the 1950s. We've had this legacy for a long time, and we have amazing world-beating universities in the UK, world-leading universities, and they all have very, very good AI groups. And we need to build on that. But at the moment, a lot of it gets exported out to the US, and increasingly we will be buying AI from China, who are putting huge amounts of money into this. So this is the big world that we're in, and we're still 3rd. And we have another thing which is a bit of interest to Jersey. In the UK, we have a fabulous tech startup culture. Successive governments, whatever politics, have built that up and continue to build it up. And that's grown into an AI startup culture, which is based in the megapolises of London and Manchester and Edinburgh. But we have almost twice the number of AI startups the rest of Europe put together. You know, we have fabulous culture here, and that's what the government in 2017. Remember, this was just post the Brexit referendum, so they needed to do something that was talking about growth, and so that was why they did this review. So to cut a long story short, Jerome Pesenti and I, Jerome was a CEO of Benevolent AI at the time. We wrote a review in 4 months, which talked about how the UK could build on that legacy and grow jobs in this era, and not just be a service industry for a service industry, not just be a service culture for the US and China. So again, to cut a long story short, that then became part of the government's industrial strategy, which led to a sector deal, which meant that they put a package of £1 billion into AI growth in the UK. Now, there's lots of things I could talk about. There were 4 strands in that. One was all about use of data and data sharing and data exchange. A big strand in the review on skills, which I'll come back to in a minute. There was stuff about leadership, how we develop leadership in AI in the UK, and there was stuff about a whole section on adoption of AI by industry. And then coming to skills, of course, we wanted to, the top of the pipe thing had to be preserving our legacy in our universities, which meant more PhDs, more MSCs in AI, scholarships from industry for that, fellowships to attract people from all over the world, to try and attract the best back into the UK or keep them here. All countries are trying to do that, of course. If you're going to train all these people, you need AI professors. And our biggest problem is that there's a world shortage of AI professors, and it takes a good 20 years to grow an AI professor post-degree. So they are far and few between, and they are seriously poached by industry all the time. So we've got to try and fill that pipe of PhDs, fellowships, and create an attractive environment for people to want to do their research and teaching in AI education in the UK. Now, we're moving now into part of the review that I produced. Recommended the UK set up an office for AI, which is between the digital department, DCMS, and the business department, BASE, and reports directly into the Cabinet Office. We have an AI council now, which I'm on as skills champion, and we spent that £1 billion basically, and we're putting in a bid for some more, and the work goes on. But we are moving into a phase now in the UK where we're talking about, and this is where I come back to Jersey, we're talking about, I call it AI for everyone. The government don't like me calling it that, but basically AI is not just for people who can go to a university and go and do a PhD in AI. That is, it's just like the digital, as you said, Dominic, it's not all about everyone having to be coders. And because it's going to affect every part of our world. You're already using AI. If you use a search engine, you're using AI. It's as simple as that. Smartphone, you're using AI, and it's using us as well. But so we're moving into a phase where we're trying to provide upskilling, scale up our upskilling, and that's what we're the next phase in the UK, as well as continuing the more academic paths as well. And that upskilling is for everybody, as you said, Dominic, entrepreneurs, business execs, parents, teachers, grandparents, kids in schools. We need everybody to be aware of artificial intelligence and the digital world generally, not just because of the jobs, but also because it's a world we've got to learn to live in. And you have to understand both, the fantastic things it can do, but also the threats that it leads to. And that's another whole conversation. So it's we're trying to do a lot of that in terms of and Boris Johnson in a speech 2 or 3 weeks ago talked about government money going into UK government money going into basically further education colleges, so that anyone over 23 in the UK who hasn't got the skills can go to a course at an FE college and get and be paid or get a free scholarship to get a course in the digital. He's talking about the digital, but of course that includes the AI. So I'm nearly coming to the end, Dominic, in case you're worried. I don't know how long I've been speaking for.
Not at all. I wish we had another hour, but yeah.
I've got a couple more major points to make. Well, one more really. So this is we're moving into the whole upskilling world, and I think two more. The question for me in terms of Jersey and what we talk about on the Digital Jersey board is, how does Jersey play in this world as a small island off a coast? Now you have an advantage in that you are very, very close in many ways to the third superpower in the world in AI. So Jersey should take an advantage of that. It doesn't matter these days, post-COVID, it doesn't matter where you live, right? You can live on Jersey and have a fabulous job in this big world, particularly, of course, in the UK, because it's easiest there in terms of employment law. But you can I think you can in some ways have the best of both worlds, or all worlds these days. We've learned how to live online more and being in that digital world. So I think that Jersey needs to position itself to take best advantage of, the mothership, if you like, however Jersey people think of the UK. I don't know if you think of it as a mothership or not, but anyway, that bigger island that has a lot of things to offer. And what I want to do as part of Digital Jersey is help create that collaboration, those contacts, the develop modules. And I want to talk about, my last thing I want to talk about, it's really important to me, is diversity. And I've been in the computing world since the 1980s, so that's a long time. And most of that time, I've been in a minority. There are very few women in computing, very, very few women professors in computing, and very, very, very few women professors of AI in computing. I learned from my mentor, Karen Spark-Jones, who was at Cambridge and invented everything to do with information retrieval. If you use Google again, you'll use the idea she developed. Her name isn't known. She's not with us anymore. She came up with the wonderful phrase, "Computing is too important to be left to men." And that's not to denigrate men, it's to say, there's 50% of this planet is women, and we must be involved as much as men in terms of developing the systems, designing the systems, and applying the systems. So many things, including these, are designed by men for men, right? and the software that we use. So anyway, that's a passion piece of mine, and so I apply that into AI as well. And we realised that when we were funding these courses, PhDs, MScs for AI, we were going to take a pipeline that already had no women in it and take a subset of that to go into AI. So what we did was we put into the review a plan for AI MScs, master's courses, for people without a technical background. The government funded those last year, and 50% of some last year, the government funded, the universities are beginning to teach them, and 50% of the scholarships have to go to underrepresented groups, including women and BAME students. So that, I think, as I say, the first time it's happened in the UK, and it's one of the things I'm proudest of. And I would love to develop some sort of modular online or co-creation of a degree with Jersey to help people in Jersey get into that world.
Wendy, we could talk for hours. We could talk for hours, I'm sure, but I want to give Daniel some time. But I think, you know, as somebody with 4 daughters who one's going into computer science, one's going into nursing, and 2 are toddlers, really. So I do want a more diverse and inclusive world of computing and AI. So
fathers say to me, if you just all turn it, it'd be fabulous if you actually deliver on that. The number of fathers that say that to me.
I'll try my best. Well, one's definitely going down the computing route, but one doesn't. However much I push her, she's going down the nursing and caring route.
Well, that's what it's been like, you
over
see.
To you. Can you, Daniel, over to you. Can you just wrap us up? We've got 10 minutes for your session, and we'd love to hear from your thoughts on the future of skills and what we all need to invest in terms of skills for employees and society.
All right, thank you. I want to come at this slightly differently as well. And we started with digital transformation, and there's a lot of research we're doing at Imperial College and teaching this stuff all the time and saying 70% of organisations are going through a digital transformation. And then we've also said 70% of digital transformations fail. So we started doing a load of research to work out why they're failing. And we kind of broke it down to 10 pots. One of the biggest pots is skills, was having the right kind of people. So I want to talk about that a kind of little bit from that perspective. If you try and define what digital transformation is, herein lies the problem a little bit. So the definition we've been using is we need to create organisations that can operate in the fast changing environment that we're in at the moment. So basically saying, in very simple terms, where are we now and where do we need to be to operate in this fast changing environment? And that makes it sound like digital transformation is a destination. That we're going to go through all this change stuff, we're going to put this digital in place, we're going to put this tech in place. Suddenly again makes it sound like it's a tech problem. And then suddenly we're going to be transformed, we'll be beautiful butterflies and we'll be able to fly off into the sunset and we'll be successful. The reality is what you're actually doing is creating organisations that are ready to constantly change. And that reflects why there's no right answer to this question, because what we need today in terms of skills will change very, very quickly. So what we really need is a culture of ongoing learning. So there's a couple of things we can do with that. As organisations, we need organisations that embrace ongoing learning. And that doesn't mean sending people to courses every month, because otherwise it turns into this thing. You go to a course, you learn something, you go back to work as normal. Target Internet, which is one of the companies that I run, we sell this kind of online learning platform, skills benchmarking, mainly around kind of digital marketing side of things. And we go into organisations, they get really excited about it. Oh, we've got this great online learning, 200 modules, it's all bite-sized, you can do it during the working day, and they all take it, and then nobody uses it. So then our job is to encourage the usage. And what you find is a culture that essentially, if you're sitting there learning during your working hours, you're not doing a job. So we need to change that. And I wrote a book called Building Digital Culture, which was basically a book about digital transformation. And what we realized, the more we looked at it, the more that people thought it was a tech problem, but actually it was a cultural problem. And we're going to have to constantly evolve our skills. So that's kind of from the digital transformation point of view. We then did something at the Chartered Institute of Marketing to actually go out and sample people's skills. Now, this looked at tech, but it also looked at the various different areas of digital marketing, but it also looked at traditional marketing skills, leadership, entrepreneurship, those kind of things as well. Fundamentally, there is a huge skills gap. I mean, Dom's familiar with this stuff and talking about it all the time, but there is this massive skills gap. It is a huge problem. We've been leaning on the same skills for a long time. We haven't got good at that. I mean, like, if marketing's a great one, we talk about using AI in marketing a lot now, and we're talking a lot of the clever stuff Google's doing and the research we're doing at Imperial College. We can't do email marketing right at the moment, and that's been around for a long time. And it's, you know, there's some we're just not learning. So what we found with that is that, yes, there's a skills gap. Yes, that needs to be improved. You've got junior people coming into roles actually better equipped than they were 2 or 3 years ago. So the universities, the likes of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, the Chartered Management Institute are doing a better job. You've got director level has improved in the last 2 years, but let's bear in mind that it's from an incredibly low base. So we're doing some work with the IOD, the Institute of Directors, and basically saying that we need leaders and the most senior people to get this stuff, to at least ask the right questions. So there is a problem there, but maybe that's improving. But we've discovered this kind of squeezed middle, where you've got heads of department, managers and things like that got their skills a while ago. They're now not doing this stuff. They're leading other people that are doing it or managing them. And actually, they don't know to ask the right questions. So if they've got someone working analytics for them, or someone comes to them and talks to them about machine learning, and they don't understand it enough to ask the right questions. So you've got that in-company culture that needs to change. And then finally, I think we have an educational problem, particularly at undergraduate level. So undergraduate degrees don't tend to get updated as quickly as they should be. And exactly as Wendy said, we're struggling with getting the right people into place. The thing at Imperial College was interesting is that they're bringing in more practitioners to teach as well. So people that are working very much in industry are kind of being brought in to teach an awful lot more, a lot of these programs, the MSCs, the undergraduate programs. And what we've tried to do in Jersey, which is not something that's like, good for Jersey, we're trying to do something that's good on a global scale, which is say, okay, reimagine that undergraduate experience and actually create a 2-year program where people are learning the tech. So we're doing the data science, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, all those kind of great buzz terms that we're talking about. But also we're doing the creative. We're doing leadership. They're doing resilience training in their first year. So we're hopefully trying to build something that gives that broad set of skills, because when we spoke to employers, the skills they needed were problem solvers. In a fast changing environment, we need people that can bring together the right people, can work collaboratively, that maybe have got deep knowledge in AI or in creative or in leadership, but have a broad enough set of skills, that T-shaped person, that allows us to solve problems and ask the right questions and interact with different groups of people. So the digital leadership program that's literally running next door is attempting to do that, and we think doing a very good job of it. And we've got very, very enthusiastic group of people, and you'll be pleased to hear as well, we have got more female than male students. So it's interesting when you come at it from that broader sense that actually we can do something really successful that will address a couple of things. It will address the needs in industry, because this has been a line behind industry. It's academically rigorous, but also it creates the entrepreneurs and the leaders of the future. And I think the opportunity for Jersey specifically with this is that we can create these entrepreneurs that are wealth creators in their own right on Ireland. We can also create people that can lead businesses here and elsewhere. And we start to not see digital as a silo, but digital is something that enables all the other organizations across the island and globally as well.
You're mute, Dominic.
Hi, everybody. So, Daniel, thank you very much. You're the classic 2020. You're on mute. So, what I'd like to do is pose one question that we got from the audience. So, for somebody listening to all this, it can sound quite daunting. Where AI is coming, we need more professors to be able to teach it. We need to be able to learn quite a diverse range of skills. But where do you start? If I'm listening to this and I want to improve my skills, how do I assess my current levels, and where would I start? Where would you recommend that somebody starts to be part of this sort of digital transformation journey if they're an employee? Let's assume outside of the tech sector, so they're in operations or finance.
That's easy. Go to the Digital Jersey Academy.
Good answer.
Perfect. Thanks,
See what's on offer. It's the best in Jersey. It's easily the best. I couldn't say something as easy as that in the UK. Can in Jersey.
Daniel, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree. Come to the Digital Jersey Academy, I couldn't agree more. But I'd also say it depends on. the key thing for me here is that there's a load of stuff on offer here. Wherever you are in the world, there is no end of kind of training stuff available online. The reality is that you've got to find what you're passionate and interested in. So actually investigating this stuff to learn that. But there's plenty of tools to kind of benchmarking as well. So like I spoke about the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So if you are a marketer or a comms person or anything like that, we've built a benchmark. We can go through and test yourself, and it'll work out where your skills gaps are. And there's various tools for doing that, and they're of varying quality. So I think it's not that there's a lack of stuff out there. I think you need to find what you're passionate about. What I'd also say is start with a problem. So if you look at where you start with digital transformation, everyone wants to know, should we look at tech first? Should we look at the comms, the marketing, HR? Actually start with the customer. So start with your target audience and what you want to deliver, and then solve their problem. What skills do you need to solve their problem? And if you can work that out, that's the starting point, because that means you'll deliver a better service, you'll be more successful, you have a better career, and it starts to fill in all of those gaps.
And same question for you, Ali. Where would you recommend people start? And you know, you mentioned there soft skills, technical skills, the work you've done in Luxembourg.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a short answer and a kind of longer one. A short answer is another app we have. So if you want to go on the App Store, find PwC's digital fitness app. It's a great way of looking at where you are, what you understand. And it's not for specialists at all. And you can set up a score of how digitally fit you are, and it curates a kind of personalised set of learning little bite-sized bits if you want to improve your score over time. So that's a quick, simple thing. I think the sort of broader answer, and just building on what Daniel was saying, is that have the conversation in your workplace, this sense about kind of mindset change and opportunity. I mean, there's great examples of businesses, you know, getting together little groups of people to sort of look at problem solve, seeing what you can do, learning by doing. That's the way to kind of do it. And there's some great examples of how you can build little communities of champions within your network or within your company to be able to do that. So that's a sort of another sort of practical way.
Brilliant, Ali. What I'd like to do now, so just to wrap up, can we each give a final thought to the audience on what you'd like to see, you know, anything you'd like to give back to the audience in terms of a recommendation, a call to action for somebody who wants to, you know, if I'm currently an employee, I'm worried about my career, where should I go next? What would you recommend to them? So over to Wendy.
Oh, sorry, what did you say? I've just realised I've got 11 o'clock.
One final thought to the audience in terms of, you know, what if you had to give them one action that they should do today or tomorrow, what would that be to sort of take part in this sort of digital transformation that's happening in industry?
One action. Oh, blimey. Well, can I say the same answer? Go visit the Digital Academy. I don't know. Yes. Help me sort out. No, sorry. Go someone else.
Ali, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I guess my final word would be a kind of call to action for kind of government and industry to work together here on the islands. We've got, as we've sort of alluded to, we've got some fantastic ingredients here. We've got the academy, we've got the fact that upskilling and this challenge is recognised in the kind of fiscal stimulus and recovery programme budget envelopes for government. We have got lots of, I think we've got, you know, lots of the right ingredients. I think what we now have a real imperative to do is to really build the pace and the scale of doing this, and doing it in a way that is not leaving people behind here in Jersey. So I think taking everything we've talked about today and sort of really accelerating it is going to be really important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ali. And Daniel?
Closing thought, but I've also been just passed 2 questions, Dom, as well, that we've got a couple of minutes to answer, apparently. So we've got until 15:15 to answer those, apparently. So I'll come to those in a second. From a sum up point of view, for me, this is an individual responsibility and an organisational responsibility and a government responsibility. So we need the educational institutions in place to deliver stuff that's moving at the right pace. And that's very much a question that I'll come to in a second. Individuals need to embrace their responsibility for this as well. We have to have this culture of ongoing learning. And that's pretty easy if you're just entering the workplace. If you've been doing something for 30 years and you're told you've got to do it differently, it's a bit of a pain. But actually, if we don't, we're actually holding everything back. So there's a challenge there. And then organisations need to provide this culture of being able to actually provide these learning interventions, which are not just training courses, but actually a whole host of things that we can do. So on that note, coming to the questions that have just been passed, I'm just going to read these out now. How do you develop the students we have in our education system now to be ready for these job roles when the curriculum is still traditional and the parents who guide their career and educational choices are not fully up to speed with the digital economy? I've got some thoughts on that. I see if Ali has as well, potentially. I mean, what I was going to say is that, and I think Wendy has left us now, is that first of all, there is a responsibility for us to, as parents, to build our education ourselves so we're asking the right questions. And what was really exciting to me is on the digital leadership program, the part-time course, we've got people from about 25 years old up into their 60s. And one of the ladies in the 60s, she's retired, and I was saying, why have you decided to do the course? And she said, because I've got grandchildren. And I need to know the world that they're kind of operating in. It's my responsibility to take that. And I thought that was a really good, refreshing view. I think, as I said, we've got a problem in the undergraduate world, and I think in Jersey we're hoping to kind of try to address that as well. So I think there's lots of layers that we need to try and fix those things. I don't know if Ali, if you want to.
No, absolutely, I agree with all of that, and I think the thing I would add to that, just reflecting on the experience when we worked at a kind of economy level with Luxembourg on how you shift the curriculum and how you sort of develop new and different types of learning for different people in the economy. What was really interesting is when you start having that dialogue properly at an economy-wide level, new players come into the market, and there's some great examples of some of the businesses there actually pivoting some of their model and saying, actually, do you know what, we're going to become a training provider because it will benefit us as a kind of employer in the future, but also we can see this is absolutely critical for us and, you know, our success is reflected in the success of the economy and the kind of community. And you know, so it'd be really great to see more of that here in Jersey. I mean, as a sort of aside, you know, we're sort of taking it quite seriously ourselves as PwC locally here, and we're starting particularly with primary schools and trying to look at how we deliver some of a digital curriculum in a new and innovative way. And it's those sorts of partnerships. There is plenty of space for everyone, I think, to think in that kind of way to transform things here.
And that feeds back to a point that was made earlier on by McKinsey saying about, is the government responsible for this? How much is it for private organisations to take responsibility? And I think PwC is very much doing that. If you look at what's happening in the schools, how can those organisations enable schools and help them to do those kind of things as well? So there's definitely a role for both in that.
Absolutely.
The last question, I think we've answered to some extent already. For those that want to improve their skills in the new economy, what's the best way to assess your current skill levels and determine what your strengths and weaknesses are? I think, you know, that Ali's spoken about the PwC app that allows you to do that. If you Google digital skills benchmark, you'll find the one that we created with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and there's various other ones on there that allow you to do that. Dom's doing a huge amount of work and publishing reports into identifying where the skills gaps are with this as well. So that was the two questions. So thank you very much, Dom, for hosting.
Brilliant. Thank you all for being wonderful panelists. I'm sure we could. Hopefully, we had another hour, but I'm sure we'll have more of these sessions over the coming weeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks.
Dominic and panel, thank you so much. Learning lots. I think my favourite moments of the morning has to be Dame Wendy saying, I'm not sure why I'm here, and then delivering the most eloquent and insightful 15 minutes where I think we learned more than we ever expected to, but that's why we love her so much as well. Now, one of the key words I kept hearing during the course of this morning was the word creativity, and that brings us on to our plan of action for this afternoon. So let's take a look at what's happening in our session this afternoon from 3 o'clock today. Here's what's in store for you this afternoon. We'll be returning to Daniel Rowles, who's no stranger to us during the course of this morning, but talking in much more detail about the digital skills crisis. We'll also be speaking to Google alumni Stefan Thoma to talk about learning in a broader sense, and also the general overview of innovation and how that plumbs into creativity. And then I suspect I'll be sliding back in to chat to both of them to learn even more on the basis of what they've told us. So that is to come this afternoon from 3 o'clock. Just a reminder, tomorrow we unveil the Jersey Tech Awards. I cannot wait for that. If you want to find out more details and register to watch, get yourself to the website. That's digital.je/TechWeek. For now, from me and all the team, thanks for watching. See you next time.
you.